In the age before refrigeration, the United States solved summer with axes, horses, sawdust, and frozen lakes. That sounds impossible now, because cold feels permanent to us. You press a button, open a door, and there it is. Milk cold, meat cold, medicine cold, ice waiting in a tray. We live inside a world where cold arrives silently through a wall. But for most of the 19th century, cold was not a switch. It was a harvest. It had to be cut out of winter by hand. Every January, when the freeze held hard enough across New England, the Hudson Valley, Maine, the upper Midwest, and the lakes around northern towns, men walked out onto sheets of ice with horse-drawn plows and long saws and began turning a frozen landscape into an industrial product. They scored the surface into grids. They cut blocks weighing hundreds of pounds. They floated those blocks through channels carved into the lake itself. Then they raised them up into wooden ice houses, packed them in sawdust, and kept them there until July and August, when the rest of the country needed winter back. That ice chilled butchers' counters in Boston. It cooled beer in St. Louis. It preserved fish in New York. It sat in hospital wards, on railroad dining cars, in hotels, in grocers' bins, in saloons, in private iceboxes, and in the kitchens of families who had never seen a machine make cold and would have thought the very idea sounded like witchcraft. Before America manufactured refrigeration, it harvested it. And the thing that keeps getting me is how enormous the system was. This was not a quaint local tradition. It was not one town cutting a few blocks off the mill pond. It was a national industry. Cities depended on it. Railroads depended on it. Brewers, meat packers, hospitals, fishermen, hotel keepers, and ordinary households depended on it. Whole urban summers were made possible by what happened on frozen water in the dead of winter. If you care about the work that built this country, the work that lived under ordinary daily life, and made modern comfort possible before modern machinery arrived, subscribe to Global Old History right now. This channel is about the forgotten systems, the forgotten labor, the forgotten men who made the country function so quietly that later generations forgot the work ever existed. Stay with me, because the ice harvest is one of the strangest and most important industries America ever built. Here is the problem they were solving. A city in July spoils food fast. Meat turns, milk turns, oysters turn, fruit goes soft, beer sours. Medical supplies become harder to keep safe. A butcher in 1880 cannot promise fresh meat in a heat wave unless somebody, months earlier, stored away thousands of tons of winter. A railroad dining car cannot serve chilled butter crossing hot country unless ice was loaded at stations all along the route. A hospital cannot reduce fever the way doctors then understood it without an ice supply. A family with an icebox cannot keep leftovers, butter, and milk safe through August unless a delivery wagon brings blocks from an ice house that was filled in January. That meant the calendar ruled everything. If the winter was hard and long, the ice companies smiled. If the winter was warm, cities got nervous. Newspapers tracked the freeze. Merchants watched pond thickness. Ice dealers argued over quality, storage capacity, and transportation. A bad harvest in one region could drive up prices far away. Cold was as much a supply chain as coal or flour. And what made it possible was not just labor, but improvement. Men like Frederick Tudor, the famous Ice King, helped turn stored natural ice into a business on a national and even international scale. Others improved the tools and methods. By the middle and late 19th century, the industry had become organized, systemized, and brutally efficient. A frozen lake stopped being scenery. It became a factory floor. The best ice came clear and hard, dense, blue-white, free of trapped snow and too many air bubbles. Snow on the surface had to be scraped off first, because snow insulated the sheet and spoiled the cutting surface. So the day often began with horse scrapers clearing broad paths across the lake. Then came the markers and groovers, horse-drawn tools fitted with teeth that scored long straight lines into the ice, one past one direction, another across it. Slowly, the whole frozen surface turned into a grid of rectangles, a Crystal City street plan stretching across the water. That was before the serious cutting even began. On smaller ponds and earlier operations, men worked with handsaws and chisels for much of the job. On larger operations, horses pulled heavier ice plows that deepened the grooves with each round until the blocks were nearly free. Then the saw gangs and pikemen took over. Once a channel opened, the blocks began to move. That is one of the weirdest parts of the process to picture. A lake that had seemed solid and dead a moment before suddenly became a moving workshop. Men stood on narrow edges, guiding block after block through black water lanes cut into the frozen sheet. Each block could weigh a few hundred pounds. Some operations cut standard sizes intended for easier storage and delivery. Others varied depending on the market. But however you size it, the work was the same. Grip it with tongs, lever it with pike poles, keep it moving, don't let it jam, don't step wrong near the edge, don't get careless when your hands go numb. Because this was dangerous work even when nothing dramatic happened. The cold alone could ruin a man. Wet gloves froze stiff, beards iced over, boots got heavy and slick. The steel of tools burned exposed skin. A normal winter day on the ice might mean hours of wind over open water, glare off the surface, numb feet, cracked knuckles, and shoulders aching from constant handling. Men went home stiff, soaked, and half frozen. And that was the good version. The bad version was when the sheet gave way. Everybody on the lake knew that fear. A warm current under the ice, a pressure ridge, a weakened stretch near an inlet or outlet, the edge of a cutting channel hidden by snow dust, a loaded horse stepping too close to open water, a man backing up while using a pike pole, forgetting exactly where the lane behind him began. The work demanded confidence, but the confidence could never become comfort, because the lake did not forgive comfort. If you went into near-freezing water wearing wool, boots, and work layers, you had very little time before the cold took your hands and then the rest of you. The nearest men might reach you with poles. They might not. Even if they hauled you out, you could still lose fingers, lose weeks of work, lose your health, or pick up pneumonia that followed you into spring. And still the harvest had to go on, because cities needed the ice. That is the sentence everything comes back to. Cities needed the ice. So the industry built itself around scale. By the late 19th century, the biggest companies were not storing a village's worth of frozen water. They were storing mountains of it. Their ice houses rose like long wooden warehouses, insulated with sawdust, straw, and clever stacking. The blocks went up conveyors and elevators from the lake channel into the storage buildings where crews packed them tight in rows and layers. Sawdust filled the gaps and sealed the heat out. A good ice house could keep a huge share of its contents through the warm season if built and managed correctly. Think about the ingenuity in that. America learned to preserve winter with wood waste from sawmills. Sawdust, the stuff most people saw as scrap, became insulation. Ice, the thing that wants more than anything in the world to vanish back into water, could be held for months with nothing more advanced than well-built walls, tight stacking, and a blanket of dry particles around every block. That is industrial intelligence of a very old kind. Simple materials, hard labor, precise method, immense payoff. Here is what a day looked like on a major harvest. Men were up before daylight. Coffee, bread, salt pork, maybe beans. Then onto the lake while the stars were still up and the cold was deepest. Horses stood steaming in harness. Foremen walked the line. Scrapers went out first if fresh snow had fallen. The scoring teams followed. By full morning, the surface of the lake was lined and relined with grooves. Then the plows deepened them. Saw crews widened the channels. Pikemen and floaters started moving blocks toward shore. Tongs bit. Boots scraped. Men shouted distances over the wind. The work did not really stop. It shifted. At shore, the industrial side took over. Conveyor belts, hoists, ramps, and men stationed at every transition point. Blocks slid, rose, bumped, turned, and disappeared into the mouth of the ice house. Inside, stackers had their own skill. Too loose and you wasted space. Too tight in the wrong way and the flow jammed. Bad stacking increased melt loss. Good stacking meant summer profit. And profit mattered. Because the ice trade could make fortunes. Not every worker saw much of that fortune, of course. Like most 19th century industries, the money concentrated near the ownership and distribution end, while the hardest bodily risk stayed on the laboring side. But for cities, the product itself was transformative. Ice delivery became a regular part of urban life. Blocks arrived on wagons, then later other kinds of local transport, wrapped in cloth or straw, carried with iron tongs into homes and shops. Families learned how to use an icebox efficiently. Housewives tracked how long a block would last in summer heat. Grocers built business models around chilled storage. Brewers and meatpackers scaled operations that would have been much more difficult without reliable cold. The railroad changed the story too. Once lines spread and cars adapted, natural ice could move farther and faster. Fish, dairy, and meat all benefited. So did passengers. The idea of comfort in long-distance travel, especially in summer, leaned more than most people now realize on the winter harvest. One quick ask from me. If this is the history you came looking for, subscribe right now. This channel lives on stories exactly like this, the work under the ordinary things, the systems everyone used and almost nobody stopped to think about. One click tells the algorithm these stories matter. Then come back, because I want to show you what the ice actually did to everyday life. It changed time. That is not too dramatic. It really did. Before dependable cold storage, the clock on food was harsher, shopping patterns were tighter, spoilage hovered over every decision. Preservation existed, of course, salting, smoking, pickling, drying, canning, as those methods spread. But cold widened the margin. It let urban households hold more perishable food for longer. It let businesses plan. It let physicians and hospitals use cooling as treatment in ways they could not without supply. It let cities swell larger while still being fed. In that sense, the ice trade was part of the hidden infrastructure of urbanization. We tend to remember waterworks, sewers, gaslight, railroads. We should. They mattered. But cold mattered too. A city's ability to stay supplied through heat is part of what makes a city modern. Before electric refrigeration, natural ice was the bridge. And that bridge had a human cost beyond the harvest itself. Workers in the trade did not all stay on the lakes. There were cutters, haulers, loaders, stackers, teamsters, warehouse men, delivery men, and laborers handling storage and transport in every stage between the frozen pond and the family icebox. Injuries were common. Tongs slipped, blocks shifted, wagons tipped, horses spooked, feet got crushed, backs got strained. Men working in and out of cold environments all season paid for it in joints and lungs. A single dropped block could smash a hand or shin. A bad fall at a conveyor or ramp could end a season's earnings in a heartbeat. And the labor was intensely seasonal. That made it unstable. In some regions, men combined it with farm work, timber work, dock work, or hauling. A man might cut ice in deep winter, work another trade in spring, and still speak of the ice harvest as the hardest work he did all year because of its rhythm, its exposure, and the sheer strangeness of treating a frozen lake like a job site. There was another problem too: weather risk. A winter that did not freeze hard enough could send merchants scrambling. Some companies tried to diversify their storage sources. Others shifted where they cut. Newspapers in warmer years worried openly about shortages. People today talk about supply shocks in abstract financial language. In the 19th century, a poor ice year could become a real worry you felt in the kitchen, the butcher shop, the brewery, and the druggist's store. So the industry always lived with a little anxiety. Every warm spell in January mattered. Every thaw mattered. Every snowstorm mattered. The product was literally disappearing or not forming right there in front of you. Not many industries are that intimate with weather. And yet for decades, the system worked well enough that many Americans saw nothing odd about it. That is how completely the industry integrated itself into daily life. When something works, people stop marveling. They just depend on it. But eventually the old winter harvest met its rival. Mechanical refrigeration had been developing for years, especially in commercial settings, breweries, packing houses, specialized facilities. At first, it did not immediately erase the natural ice trade. Natural ice was still useful, familiar, and often cheaper in some contexts. There was overlap. There was competition. There were years when the old and new systems stood side by side. But once mechanical cold became more reliable, more scalable, and more broadly distributed, the fate of the ice harvest was sealed. That took time. Old industries rarely die in one clean, dramatic moment. They thin out, they retreat, they become local. They lose younger workers, they lose capital. They keep serving certain towns or habits while the future grows around them. Then one day, what used to be essential is quaint, then obsolete, then mostly forgotten. That is what happened here. The ice houses emptied and were not refilled. The horse-drawn markers sat idle. The saws stayed in sheds. Delivery routes changed. Homes moved from the icebox to the refrigerator. Cold migrated from a harvested, seasonal commodity to a permanent mechanical service. And in one sense, that was progress, obvious progress. It saved labor. It made supply steadier. It reduced the dependence on weather. It changed medicine, food safety, commerce, and domestic life for the better. But it also made the older labor invisible almost overnight. That is why I like lingering here, on the frozen lake before dawn, before the refrigerator hums in the next century. Because once you see what it took to keep a 19th century city cold, you cannot quite unsee it. Every old illustration of an ice wagon, every old household icebox, every menu boasting chilled oysters or cold butter, every hospital note about ice. Every summer, beer poured in an American city before widespread electric refrigeration. All of it points backward to winter labor on open water. Here is the image I want to leave you with. Stand on the shore of a hard frozen lake in January. The light is low. The air hurts to breathe. A team of horses moves slowly across the white surface, pulling a grooving plow. Farther out, men with pike poles stand beside black channels cut into the sheet. Blocks of ice, bright as glass and blue in the edges, slide one after another toward shore. At the ice house, a conveyor rattles and creaks. Men stack winter by hand. Sawdust drifts in the air. Boots ring on packed frozen surfaces. Somebody shouts. Somebody laughs through a scarf. Somebody nearly slips and catches himself with a pole. It is loud. It is industrial. It is disciplined. And it exists only because the rest of the country will need this day half a year from now. America used to keep summer alive by cutting winter apart and storing it in wooden houses. That was not a trick. That was infrastructure. And almost nobody remembers the men who did it. If somebody in your family ever delivered ice, cut it, stored it, or still kept an old icebox in the house, tell me in the comments. I read every one. I'll see you in the next one.